The backstage area was chaos. People running everywhere, cameras rolling, producers shouting into headsets. And somewhere in the middle of all this madness stood a 12-year-old girl from Japan who looked completely out of place. Her name was Yuki. She came from a tiny fishing village that most people had never heard of. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the smell of salt and sea fills the air every morning, and where dreams of fame and fortune feel as distant as the moon. But here she was, thousands of miles from home, standing backstage at one of America's biggest talent competitions, and she was terrified. Yuki clutched an old violin case against her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. Because to her, it was. The case was worn and beaten up. The leather had cracks running through it like tiny rivers. In some places, tape held it together. It looked nothing like the shiny new cases the other contestants carried. And the other contestants noticed. A group of teenage girls walked past her, giggling. One of them pointed at Yuki's case and whispered something to her friend. They both laughed. Yuki pretended not to see. She just held her case tighter and stared at the floor. She had been waiting for 3 hours already. 3 hours of watching other people go on stage. 3 hours of hearing the crowd cheer or fall silent. 3 hours of wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life by coming here. Her English was not very good. Back home, she had studied it in school. But speaking it was different. The words got stuck in her throat. They came out wrong. People looked at her with confused faces when she tried to explain things. It made her feel small, smaller than she already was. A production assistant walked by with a clipboard. He was a young man with messy hair and tired eyes. He looked like he had not slept in days. "Tanaka?" he called out, mispronouncing her family name. "Yuki Tanaka?" Yuki raised her hand slowly. "Yes." The assistant looked at her, then looked at his clipboard, then looked at her again. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or doubt. She could not tell. "You're up in 10 minutes, he said. "Wait by the side entrance." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of people rushing around. Yuki walked to the side entrance on shaky legs. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Through a gap in the curtain, she could see the stage. It was enormous, bigger than anything she had ever seen in her life. Bright lights hung from the ceiling like 1,000 suns. The audience stretched back so far she could not see where it ended. There must have been 5,000 people out there, maybe more. 3 judges sat at a long table facing the stage. Yuki recognized them from television. They were famous, powerful. One word from them could change a person's life forever. They could make dreams come true or crush them into dust. Right now, they were watching a young man play the piano. He was good, really good. His fingers danced across the keys like water flowing over stones. When he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. The judges smiled and said kind things. The young man walked off stage with tears of joy in his eyes. Yuki felt her stomach twist into knots. How could she compete with that? She was nobody. A girl from a fishing village with a broken violin case and bad English. What was she thinking? She thought about running. Just turning around and walking out the door. Going back to the airport. Flying home. Forgetting this whole thing ever happened. But then she thought about her grandmother. Her grandmother was the reason she was here. The reason she played violin at all. The reason she had not given up 100 times before. Yuki's grandmother had been a music teacher once, many years ago. Before her hands got too old. Before her eyes got too weak. Before life got too hard, she used to tell Yuki stories about the great concert halls of the world, about the musicians who filled them with beautiful sounds, about the magic that happens when a person pours their whole soul into their instrument. When Yuki was 5 years old, her grandmother had given her a violin. Not a new one. They could not afford new things. It was old and scratched, and had been passed down through the family for generations. But to little Yuki, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Her grandmother taught her how to hold it. How to draw the bow across the strings. How to make sounds that were more than just sounds. How to make music that came from the heart. They practiced together every single day. In the early morning before school, in the evening after dinner, on weekends while other children played outside, Yuki never complained. She loved it. She loved the way the music made her feel. She loved the proud look in her grandmother's eyes when she played something perfectly. Years passed. Yuki got better. Much better. Her grandmother said she had a gift, something special that could not be taught, something that came from deep inside her. But gifts mean nothing if no one ever sees them. Their village was too small, too far from everything. There were no concert halls, no music competitions, no way for a girl like Yuki to show the world what she could do. So her grandmother made a decision. She started saving money. Every coin she earned from selling vegetables at the market went into a jar. Every month, the jar got a little fuller. It took 3 years. 3 years of waking up before sunrise. 3 years of working until her back ached and her feet swelled. 3 years of sacrifice and hope and love. Finally, there was enough. Enough for a plane ticket to America. Enough for Yuki to enter this competition. Enough for one chance to show the world who she was. Her grandmother had put the money in Yuki's hands and said something she would never forget. Go show them, little bird. Show them what lives inside you. That was 2 weeks ago. Now her grandmother was in a hospital bed back home. Too sick to travel. Too weak to be here. But she had made Yuki promise to go anyway. To not let this chance slip away. So here Yuki was. Alone. Scared. Holding her grandmother's old violin. In a taped-up case. About to walk onto the biggest stage of her life. The production assistant appeared again. "You're up," he said. "Go." Yuki took a deep breath. She thought about her grandmother watching from that hospital bed. She thought about all those early mornings and late nights. She thought about the jar of coins that took 3 years to fill. Then she walked through the curtain and onto the stage. The lights hit her like a wall of fire. She could barely see. The audience was just a blur of shadows and shapes. But she could feel them. Thousands of eyes. All staring at her. All waiting to see what this small Japanese girl with the beaten-up violin case would do. She walked to the center of the stage. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. It felt like the longest walk of her life. The judges looked up from their table. The head judge, a man with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned into his microphone. "Well, hello there," he said. His voice boomed through the speakers. "And who might you be?" Yuki swallowed hard. Her throat was dry. Her hands were shaking. "My name is Yuki," she said softly. "I come from Japan." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Japan? That's quite a journey. And what brings you all the way here?" Yuki looked down at the violin case in her hands. She thought about her grandmother, about the promise she made. "I come to play," she said simply. "I come to show you." The judges exchanged glances. One of them, a woman with perfect makeup and a designer dress, smiled politely. But it was not a real smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they are trying not to laugh. The third judge, a man known for his harsh comments and quick temper, looked at Yuki's old violin case and shook his head slowly. "All right then," the head judge said, settling back in his chair. "Show us what you've got." And in that moment, Yuki knew. She knew they did not believe in her. She knew they expected her to fail. She knew they were already thinking about the next contestant. But she also knew something they did not. She knew what lived inside her. The silence in the auditorium was heavy. 5,000 people sat in their seats, watching this small girl from Japan standing alone on that massive stage. The bright lights made her look even smaller somehow. Like a single candle trying to light up a football field. Yuki could feel the doubt in the room. It hung in the air like smoke. She did not need to understand English perfectly to know what people were thinking. Their faces said everything. Some looked bored, some looked curious. Most looked like they were just waiting for this to be over so they could see the next act. The head judge cleared his throat. He was still looking at Yuki with that half-interested expression. The kind of look someone gives when they are being polite, but their mind is already somewhere else. "So, Yuki," he said slowly, pronouncing her name carefully. "You said you came all the way from Japan to play for us. That's a very long trip. Tell us, how old are you?" "I am 12. Yuki answered. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. 12 years old, the judge repeated. He glanced at the other judges with a little smile. "And do you have family here with you? Parents? Anyone?" Yuki shook her head. "No. I come alone. My grandmother. She is sick. She cannot travel. But she is watching. From hospital." Something flickered across the female judge's face. It might have been sympathy. Or it might have been pity. "Sometimes those two things look very similar." "That's very brave of you," the woman said. "Coming here all by yourself. Your grandmother must be very proud." Yuki nodded but did not say anything. She was trying to save her words, trying to save her energy. She knew she would need all of it for what came next. The third judge, the harsh one, had been quiet this whole time. He sat back in his chair with his arms crossed over his chest. His eyes were fixed on the old violin case in Yuki's hands. There was something in his expression that made her stomach tighten. Something cold. "Let me ask you something," he said suddenly. His voice was sharp, cutting. "What exactly are you planning to play with that?" He pointed at her violin case. The way he pointed made it clear what he thought of it. Like he was pointing at a piece of garbage someone had dragged onto his stage. Yuki looked down at the case. She saw what he saw. The cracked leather, the peeling tape, the scratches and dents from years of use. It looked old. It looked cheap. It looked like something that belonged in a museum, not on a stage like this. But she also saw something else. She saw her grandmother's hands carefully cleaning this case every night. She saw the love that had been poured into it for generations. She saw history. She saw sacrifice. She saw everything that mattered. "This is my violin," Yuki said quietly. "It was my grandmother's. And her mother's before that." The harsh judge let out a small laugh. It was not a kind laugh. It was the kind of laugh that makes you feel 2 inches tall. "A family heirloom," he said, his voice dripping with something that was not quite mean but was not nice either. "How charming." A few people in the audience laughed too. Nervous laughter. The kind that fills the space when no one knows what else to do. Yuki felt her cheeks burn. Shame crept up her neck and spread across her face like wildfire. For a moment, she wanted to cry. She wanted to turn around and run off that stage and never look back. But she did not run. She stood there. She held her ground. "May I open it?" she asked. "May I show you?" The head judge waved his hand. "Please. Go ahead." Yuki knelt down on the stage floor. She placed the case flat and unclipped the latches. They were old and rusty, and made a clicking sound that echoed through the microphones. When she lifted the lid, she heard a gasp from somewhere in the audience. But it was not a gasp of amazement. It was a gasp of shock. The violin inside looked just as worn as the case. The wood was dull and scratched. The varnish had faded in patches. A small piece of white tape held the chin rest in place. The strings were thin and old. Everything about it screamed that this instrument had no business being on a stage like this. The harsh judge actually laughed out loud this time. He did not even try to hide it. The sound came through the speakers and filled the entire auditorium. Several people in the audience laughed with him. "I'm sorry," he said, though he did not sound sorry at all. "But you flew halfway around the world to play that thing? Does it even work?" More laughter from the crowd. Yuki felt each laugh like a knife in her chest. Her eyes started to sting. She blinked fast, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to fall. The female judge held up her hand to quiet the crowd. She looked at Yuki with something like concern. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "I have to be honest with you. That violin looks like it's seen better days. Are you sure you want to perform with it? We can maybe find you another instrument if you'd like." Yuki shook her head firmly. "No. I play this one. Only this one." The judges looked at each other. The head judge shrugged. The harsh judge rolled his eyes. The female judge just sighed. "All right then," the head judge said. "If that's what you want, what piece will you be performing for us today?" Yuki stood up slowly, the violin in one hand and the bow in the other. She took a breath to steady herself. "Paganini," she said. "Caprice number 24. For a moment, nobody reacted. Then the harsh judge leaned forward in his chair. "I'm sorry. Did you say Paganini? Caprice 24? Yuki nodded. The judge looked at his fellow judges with wide eyes. Then he looked back at Yuki. "Young lady, do you understand what you're saying? That piece is one of the most difficult violin compositions ever written. Professional musicians train for decades to play it. Some never master it at all. And you're telling me a 12-year-old girl with a broken-down violin is going to perform it on this stage?" His voice had changed. It was not laughing anymore. It was almost angry. Like he thought Yuki was making fun of him. Like he thought this whole thing was some kind of joke. "Yes," Yuki said simply. "I will play it." The harsh judge threw his hands up in the air. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. But his microphone caught every word. "Complete waste of time." The audience stirred. People shifted in their seats. Some whispered to each other. The energy in the room had changed. Before, people were bored. Now they were uncomfortable. They felt bad for this little girl, who was clearly about to embarrass herself in front of millions of viewers. The head judge rubbed his temples like he was getting a headache. "Okay," he said finally. "Yuki, whenever you're ready. The stage is yours." Yuki lifted the old violin to her shoulder. She positioned the bow over the strings. Her hands were trembling. She could feel every eye in the building fixed on her. She could feel the doubt, the pity, the expectation of failure. The harsh judge already had his hand hovering over the red buzzer. The button that would end her performance before it even really began. He was ready to press it. She could see it in his eyes. He was giving her maybe 10 seconds before he would shut her down. Yuki closed her eyes. She blocked out the lights. She blocked out the judges. She blocked out the 5,000 people waiting for her to fail. Instead, she thought about home. She thought about her grandmother's small house near the sea. She thought about the sound of waves crashing against the rocks in the morning. She thought about sitting in that tiny room with her grandmother, practicing until her fingers ached. She thought about the last words her grandmother had said to her at the airport. "Do not be afraid, little bird. When you play, you are never alone. I am always with you. In every note. In every breath. Play for me, and I will hear you, no matter how far away I am." Yuki took one final breath. Then she began to play. The first note cut through the silence like a blade. It was sharp, pure, perfect. It hung in the air for just a moment before fading into the second note. Then the third. Then a cascade of sound that seemed impossible. The harsh judge's hand froze above the buzzer. His finger had been ready to press it. He had been so certain this would be a disaster, but now his hand just hung there, suspended in midair, like his body had forgotten how to move. The head judge's mouth fell open. Literally fell open. He sat there with his jaw hanging down like a broken door. His eyes went wide. He blinked once. Twice, like he was trying to wake up from a dream. The female judge brought her hand to her chest. She pressed it against her heart, as if she needed to check that it was still beating. On stage, Yuki played. Her eyes were still closed. Her small body swayed gently with the music. Her fingers moved across the strings so fast they were almost a blur. But there was nothing frantic about it. Nothing forced. It was smooth, natural. Like watching water flow downhill. Like watching birds fly across the sky. The music filled the auditorium. It did not just reach people's ears. It reached something deeper. Something inside their chests. Something they did not even know was there until this moment. Paganini's Caprice number 24 is not just difficult. It is considered nearly impossible. The piece demands everything from a violinist. Speed, precision, control, emotion. Most professional musicians spend their entire careers trying to master it. Many never do. And here was a 12-year-old girl playing it like she had been born with a violin in her hands. A woman in the third row started crying. She did not even know why. The tears just came. They rolled down her cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. A man near the back of the auditorium leaned forward in his seat. He had been checking his phone when Yuki started playing. Now the phone sat forgotten in his lap. He could not look away from the stage. Two teenage girls who had laughed at Yuki backstage were sitting in the side section. They were not laughing anymore. One of them had her hand over her mouth. The other was gripping the armrest of her seat so tight her knuckles had turned white. The music climbed higher. It danced and spun and soared. There were moments when it felt light and playful, like sunshine on water. Then it would shift, becoming dark and heavy, like storm clouds rolling in from the sea. It told a story without words. A story of struggle and hope, of pain and beauty, of a little girl who refused to give up. The harsh judge slowly lowered his hand from the buzzer. He placed both hands flat on the table in front of him. He stared at Yuki like he was seeing a ghost, like everything he thought he knew about the world had just been turned upside down. His eyes were wet. He blinked rapidly, trying to fight it. He was known for being tough, cold, impossible to impress. He had made grown men cry with his harsh words. He had crushed dreams without a second thought. But right now, something was happening inside him that he could not control. The head judge had given up trying to hide his reaction. Tears streamed freely down his face. He did not care who saw. He did not care what anyone thought. In 30 years of judging talent competitions, he had never heard anything like this. Never felt anything like this. On stage, Yuki was lost in the music. She was not thinking about the judges anymore. She was not thinking about the audience or the cameras or the millions of people who would eventually watch this performance. She was somewhere else entirely. She was back home, in her grandmother's tiny house by the sea. She could smell the salt in the air. She could hear the waves crashing against the rocks. She could feel her grandmother's gentle hands guiding her fingers across the strings. Feel the music, her grandmother used to say. Do not just play it. Become it. Let it flow through you like breath, like blood, like life itself. That is what Yuki was doing now. She had become the music. Every note that came from that old, scratched violin was a piece of her soul. Every melody was a memory. Every chord was a prayer. The audience had stopped breathing. 5,000 people sat frozen in their seats, completely hypnotized by what they were witnessing. Some had tears running down their faces. Others sat with their mouths hanging open. A few had closed their eyes, just listening, letting the music wash over them like warm rain. A cameraman who had been filming for 15 years forgot to keep his camera steady. His hands were shaking too much. He had to set the camera down and just watch. A security guard standing by the exit had stopped watching the crowd. His job was to look for trouble, to keep his eyes on the audience. But he could not help it. He turned toward the stage and stood there, motionless, as the music wrapped around him like a blanket. Backstage, the other contestants had gathered near the monitors. They had come to watch this strange girl embarrass herself. They had expected to see a disaster. Instead, they stood in stunned silence, watching something they would never forget. One of them, a young man who played guitar and had been so confident about his own chances, felt something shift inside him. He had thought he was good. Really good. But watching this girl, he realized he had never truly understood what music could be. What it could do. How it could reach inside a person and touch something sacred. The music was building now. Climbing towards something. The notes came faster and faster, spinning and twisting like a tornado. Yuki's bow flew across the strings with impossible speed. Her fingers danced in patterns that should not have been possible for human hands. But there was no strain on her face, no struggle. She looked peaceful, almost happy. Like this was the easiest thing in the world. Like she could do this forever. The female judge was sobbing now. She had given up trying to hold it back. Tears poured down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She did not care. Nothing mattered. except the sound filling the auditorium. Nothing mattered except this moment. In the audience, strangers were reaching for each other. People who had never met were holding hands. A mother pulled her young son close and whispered in his ear, "Remember this. Remember this forever." The head judge thought about his own daughter. She was about Yuki's age. She played piano. She was good. But she always complained about practicing. She did not understand why she had to work so hard. He made a mental note to show her this video when he got home. To show her what dedication looks like. What passion looks like. What happens when someone gives everything they have to something they love. The harsh judge thought about his father. His father had been a musician too. A violinist, actually. He had died 10 years ago, and the judge had not thought about him in a long time. But right now, listening to this little girl play, he could almost feel his father sitting beside him. He could almost hear his father's voice saying, "This is why music matters. This is why we play." The music reached its peak. The final section of Paganini's masterpiece. The part that separates the good from the great. The part that breaks most musicians who attempt it. Yuki did not break. She attacked those final passages with a ferocity that took everyone's breath away. Her whole body moved with the music now. She was not just playing the violin. She was fighting with it. Dancing with it. Making love to it. The sounds that came from that old, worn instrument were not just notes. They were thunder and lightning. They were sunrise and sunset. They were everything beautiful and painful and true about being alive. The audience could feel it building. They could sense the end approaching. Hearts were pounding. Hands were gripping armrests. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And then, with one final, impossible flourish of notes that seemed to defy the laws of physics, Yuki played the last measure of Caprice number 24. The final note rang out across the auditorium. Then there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. Yuki stood on stage with her eyes still closed. The bow hung at her side. The old violin rested against her shoulder. She was breathing hard. Sweat glistened on her forehead. She had done it. She had played the impossible piece. And for one long, eternal moment, 5,000 people sat in perfect stillness, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Then the silence broke. The silence lasted only a heartbeat. But in that heartbeat, something changed. Something shifted in the air. You could feel it. Like the moment before a storm breaks. Like the second before lightning strikes. Then the auditorium exploded. It started with one person. A man in the front row who jumped to his feet and started clapping so hard his hands hurt. Then another person stood. Then another. Then 10 more. Then 100. Then 1,000. Within seconds, all 5,000 people were on their feet. The applause was not just loud. It was deafening. It was thunderous. It shook the walls. It rattled the lights hanging from the ceiling. It was the kind of sound that gets inside your bones and stays there. People were screaming, cheering, crying. Strangers hugged each other. A woman in the middle section collapsed back into her seat, overwhelmed by emotion, and the people next to her helped her up so she could keep clapping. On stage, Yuki finally opened her eyes. For a moment, she looked confused. Lost. Like she had just woken up from a deep sleep and did not know where she was. She blinked at the wall of people standing before her. She saw their faces, their tears, their open mouths screaming things she could not hear over the roar of applause. She did not understand. What was happening? Why were they standing? Why were they crying? Then it hit her. They were standing for her. They were crying for her. They were cheering for her. Yuki's legs started to shake. All the strength she had been holding onto during her performance suddenly drained out of her body. She felt like she might fall. She reached out and grabbed the microphone stand next to her just to stay upright. The applause would not stop. It kept going. And going. And going. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. People's hands were red and sore from clapping, but they did not care. They could not stop. They did not want to stop. The head judge was standing too. Tears were streaming down his face, and he did not even try to hide them. He was clapping so hard his whole body shook with each impact. In 30 years of doing this job, he had never seen anything like this. He had never felt anything like this. The female judge had both hands pressed against her heart. Her makeup was completely ruined. Black streaks of mascara ran down her cheeks like little rivers. She was laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by emotions she could not even name. And the harsh judge, the one who had laughed at Yuki's violin, the one who had mocked her, the one who had been ready to press that buzzer and send her home, he was crying the hardest of all. He stood at his place behind the judge's table with his shoulders shaking. He tried to wipe his eyes, but the tears kept coming. Something had broken open inside him, something he had kept locked away for a very long time. Finally, after what felt like forever, the head judge raised his hands to quiet the crowd. It took a while. People did not want to stop clapping. But eventually, slowly, the applause faded. People sat back down in their seats, though many were still wiping their eyes. The head judge picked up his microphone. His hand was trembling. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "I have been doing this for 30 years, he said slowly. 30 years. I have seen thousands of performers walk across this stage. I have heard singers and dancers and musicians from every corner of the world. I thought I had seen everything. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore." He paused. He looked at Yuki standing there on stage, still holding her grandmother's old violin. "I was wrong," he continued. "What you just did, what we all just witnessed, I do not have words for it. I genuinely do not have words. That was not just a performance. That was something else entirely. That was magic. Real, actual magic." The audience burst into applause again. The judge waited for it to quiet down before continuing. "You are 12 years old," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. 12, and you just played one of the most difficult pieces ever written for violin. Not just played it. You mastered it. You owned it. You made it yours. I have heard professional musicians with 50 years of experience who cannot do what you just did." He leaned forward in his chair, looking directly at Yuki. "Where did you learn to play like that? Who taught you?" Yuki's voice was small when she answered. "My grandmother. She taught me everything." "Your grandmother," the judge repeated softly. "The one who is watching from the hospital right now?" Yuki nodded. Her eyes were filling with tears. "Well," the judge said, his own voice breaking again, "you tell your grandmother that she did not just teach you how to play violin. She created something extraordinary. You are a gift, an absolute gift." The female judge grabbed her microphone next. She was still crying. "Sweetheart," she said, "I need to apologize to you. When you walked out here with that old violin case, I doubted you. I looked at you, and I made assumptions. I thought I knew what was going to happen. I was so wrong." She pressed her hand to her chest again. "That violin," she continued, "that beautiful, beautiful instrument that has been in your family for generations. I have heard violins that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I have heard instruments made by the greatest craftsmen in the world. And none of them ever sounded like that. Because it is not about the instrument, is it? It is about the heart of the person playing it. And your heart, Yuki. Your heart is extraordinary." The audience applauded again. But everyone was waiting. Waiting to hear from the third judge. The harsh one. The one who had laughed. He sat in his chair for a long moment without speaking. His head was bowed. His shoulders were still shaking slightly. When he finally looked up, his face was wet with tears. "I owe you more than an apology," he said quietly. His voice was different now. The sharpness was gone. The coldness had melted away. He sounded like a completely different person. "When you walked onto this stage, I laughed at you. I looked at your violin, and I laughed. I made you feel small. I made you feel like you did not belong here." He stopped. He took a deep breath. That was cruel. It was wrong. And I am deeply, deeply sorry. The audience was completely silent now. Everyone was watching the judge, watching this man who never apologized, watching him break down in front of millions of viewers. My father was a violinist, he continued. He passed away 10 years ago. He used to tell me that music is the language of the soul, that when someone truly plays from their heart, you can hear their whole life in every note. I forgot that. I got so caught up in judging and criticizing and being clever that I forgot what music is actually about. He looked at Yuki with something new in his eyes. Respect. Admiration. Maybe even love. You reminded me tonight. You, a 12-year-old girl from a fishing village in Japan, with an old violin held together by tape. You reminded me why music matters. Why any of this matters. He stood up from his chair. The other judges looked at him with surprise. This was not normal. Judges did not stand during their comments, but he did not care about normal anymore. I want you to know something, he said, his voice growing stronger. What you did tonight will stay with me for the rest of my life. I will never forget it, and I will never, ever judge someone by their appearance again. You taught me that. A 12-year-old girl taught me something I should have learned a long time ago. He started clapping. Alone at first. Then the other judges joined him. Then the audience rose to their feet once more, and the auditorium filled again with thunderous applause. Yuki stood on stage, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She clutched her grandmother's violin against her chest. She thought about how far she had come, how scared she had been, how close she had come to running away, but she had not run. She had stayed, she had played, and she had shown them. The head judge's voice cut through the applause one more time. Yuki, he said, I think I speak for everyone in this building when I say this. You do not just deserve to move forward in this competition. You deserve to win the whole thing. That was the single greatest performance I have ever witnessed on this stage. The crowd erupted again. People were chanting Yuki's name now. It echoed off the walls. It filled the air. Yuki. 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 And somewhere, thousands of miles away, in a small hospital room in a tiny fishing village in Japan, an old woman lay in her bed watching a small screen. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face. Her hands, rough from years of hard work, trembled as she pressed them together. Her little bird had done it. She had shown them all. The crowd was still chanting her name when Yuki walked off stage. Her legs felt like they were made of water. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold onto her violin. A production assistant guided her through the backstage area, but she barely noticed. Everything felt like a dream, a beautiful, impossible dream. People kept stopping her. Contestants who had ignored her before now wanted to shake her hand. Crew members who had walked past her without a second glance now looked at her with wonder in their eyes. Everyone wanted to say something. Everyone wanted to touch her, like she was something magical that had fallen from the sky. But Yuki only wanted one thing. She found a quiet corner behind some equipment cases and pulled out her phone. Her hands were trembling so much it took her 3 tries to unlock it. When the screen finally lit up, she saw 17 missed calls, all from the hospital back home. Her heart stopped. She pressed the call button and held the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice. Then someone picked up. Hello, Yuki? It was her grandmother's voice. Weak, tired, but alive. Yuki burst into tears. Grandmother, she sobbed. Grandmother, I did it. Did you see? Did you watch? There was silence on the other end. Then a sound that Yuki had not heard in a very long time. Her grandmother was laughing. A soft, gentle laugh that sounded like music itself. I saw everything, little bird. Every single moment. I watched you walk onto that stage. I watched those judges look at you like you were nothing. I watched you prove them wrong. Yuki pressed the phone harder against her ear, like she could somehow get closer to her grandmother through the device. I was so scared, she whispered. I almost ran away. I almost gave up. But you did not, her grandmother said. That is what matters. You were afraid, but you played anyway. That is true courage, Yuki. Not the absence of fear, but the strength to keep going despite it. Yuki wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. More tears kept coming, but she did not care. I played for you, grandmother. Every note was for you. I know, little bird. I felt it. Even from so far away, I felt every note in my heart. They stayed on the phone for a long time. Neither of them said much. They did not need to. Sometimes, love does not need words. Sometimes just breathing together, just existing in the same moment, is enough. Finally, a nurse's voice came through the phone. Visiting hours were over. Her grandmother needed to rest. I will call you tomorrow, Yuki promised. First thing in the morning. I will be here. Her grandmother said softly. I am not going anywhere. Not yet. I need to see my little bird fly. Cluding. The call ended. Yuki sat in that quiet corner for a while, holding the phone against her chest. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. All the early mornings, all the late nights, all the sacrifices her grandmother had made. 3 years of saving coins in a jar. 3 years of selling vegetables at the market so her granddaughter could have one chance at her dream. It had all been worth it. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Yuki advanced through round after round of the competition. Each time she performed, the audience fell silent. Each time she played, people cried. Her story spread across the internet like wildfire. Videos of her first audition were viewed millions of times. People from all over the world shared her story. They talked about the little girl from Japan who had been laughed at and then made everyone cry with her music. Letters arrived at the competition's offices. Thousands of them. People writing to say how Yuki's story had inspired them. How watching her had given them the courage to pursue their own dreams. How she had reminded them that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. Companies reached out, offering to buy her a new violin. Expensive instruments worth more money than her grandmother had earned in her entire life. Yuki politely declined every offer. This violin is my family, she explained in an interview. You cannot replace family with something new and shiny. The scratches and the tape and the worn wood. That is not damage. That is history. That is love. Thanks for watching. The final night of the competition arrived faster than anyone expected. 10 contestants had been narrowed down to 2. Yuki and a young man from New York who played piano beautifully. He was talented, really talented. The judges said it would be the closest finale in the show's history. But something happened that night that nobody saw coming. Before Yuki took the stage for her final performance, a producer approached her backstage. There was a surprise, he said. Someone who had traveled very far to see her. Yuki's heart nearly stopped when she saw who was waiting in the wings. Her grandmother. The old woman was sitting in a wheelchair, wrapped in blankets. She looked fragile, weak, but her eyes were bright and alive. And she was smiling. Grandmother! Yuki ran to her and dropped to her knees. How are you here? The doctors said you could not travel. Her grandmother reached out and touched Yuki's face with her wrinkled hand. I told them I had to see my little bird fly one more time. They could not say no to a stubborn old woman. Yuki laughed through her tears. You should not have come. It is too dangerous. What if something happens? Then something happens, her grandmother said simply. But I am not leaving this world without seeing you on that stage, one last time. Now go. Go and show them who you are. Yuki performed that night like she had never performed before. Knowing her grandmother was watching from backstage, she poured everything she had into every note. The music filled the auditorium and spilled out into the streets. People passing by the building stopped to listen. Something special was happening inside. Everyone could feel it. When the final note faded, the audience did not just stand. They erupted. The applause was so loud it could be heard 3 blocks away. People were crying and laughing and hugging strangers. Even the other finalists stood and clapped, knowing he had just witnessed something that transcended competition. The judges did not even deliberate. They did not need to. When the host announced the winner, no one was surprised. Yuki's name echoed through the auditorium, followed by a roar of celebration that seemed to shake the very foundation of the building. But Yuki did not run to the center of the stage to celebrate. She did not raise her arms in victory or jump up and down like other winners might. Instead, she walked calmly to the side of the stage where her grandmother was waiting. She knelt down beside the wheelchair and placed the trophy in her grandmother's lap. "This is yours," she said softly. "This was always yours." Her grandmother looked at the trophy, then at Yuki, then back at the trophy. Tears rolled down her weathered cheeks. "No, little bird," she whispered. "This is ours." The cameras captured that moment. An old woman and a young girl, holding a trophy together, crying and laughing at the same time. It became the most shared image of the year. People printed it out and hung it on their walls. They used it as their phone backgrounds. They showed it to their children and said, "This is what love looks like. This is what dreams look like. This is what happens when you never give up." Yuki used the prize money to pay for her grandmother's medical treatments. The best doctors. The best hospitals. She did not keep a single coin for herself. Years later, when interviewers asked her about that night, about the moment that changed her life, Yuki always said the same thing. "People think my story is about talent, about music, about proving people wrong, but it is not. My story is about a grandmother who believed in a little girl when no one else did, who worked for 3 years to give her one chance, who taught her that the most beautiful music comes not from expensive instruments, but from a heart full of love." She would pause then and smile. "I did not win that competition. My grandmother did. I just held the violin." And somewhere, in a small fishing village in Japan, an old woman sits by the sea, watching the waves crash against the rocks. On the wall behind her hangs a golden trophy. Beside it hangs a battered old violin case, held together with tape. She smiles when she hears music playing on the radio. Her granddaughter's music. Her little bird learned how to fly, and the whole world stopped to listen.